She had no idea the man she was about to marry was the same man she had thrown away. She stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting the diamond necklace her mother had clasped around her neck, and she smiled. Not the nervous smile of a bride, the satisfied smile of a woman who believed she had finally won. The veil cascaded down her back. The dress, hand-stitched by a designer whose waiting list ran 18 months, caught the light like something out of a magazine. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly what she had always believed she deserved. Sophia Hart had spent the last 3 years clawing her way back from the edge of a collapse she had refused to understand. The company had nearly died. Her name had nearly been buried under the rubble of debt and board resignations and client exits she had never seen coming. But somehow she had survived. Somehow, a mysterious investor had appeared out of nowhere, purchased the company's controlling stake through a wall of lawyers and shell corporations, and stabilized everything before the whole structure fell into dust. And then, 6 months later, that same investor had sent a message, not a business message, a personal one. Nobody knew his face. Nobody had ever sat across a table from him. His name moved through boardrooms and financial columns like a rumor. Carter Acquisitions, they called the firm, though nobody could explain who Carter was or where it come from. Some said he had built his fortune overseas. Some said he was connected to sovereign wealth funds across 3 continents. Some said he was simply a ghost who had learned how to move money better than anyone alive. What Sophia knew was this: he had chosen her. Of all the women in his orbit, of all the polished executives and socialites who had attempted to penetrate the mystery, he had sent flowers to her office, then a handwritten note, then a dinner invitation through his chief representative, a quiet, precise woman named Grace who answered every personal question with a smile that gave nothing away. Sophia's mother had nearly fainted when she found out. "Do you understand what this means?" Her mother had said, gripping Sophia's wrist across the kitchen table. "This is your reset. This is everything." Sophia had not needed convincing. She was already convinced. The wedding was arranged in 11 weeks. That alone told you something about the kind of power this man possessed. A cathedral venue that had a 2-year booking queue. A catering team flown in from Paris. A guest list that read like a financial summit. Investors, board members, former government officials, journalists from 3 major publications who had been granted access under strict conditions. And the groom had not appeared at a single planning meeting. Not one. Every decision had been routed through Grace. Every confirmation. Every approval. Sophia had asked twice whether she could simply speak to him by phone, and Grace had smiled that unreadable smile and said he preferred to let the day speak for itself. Her friends thought it was romantic. Her mother called it sophisticated. Her father said a man that powerful earned the right to operate on his own terms. Sophia had told herself the same thing every night for 11 weeks. If she had paused long enough, she might have noticed something, a detail, a thread, the name of the firm, the way Grace sometimes tilted her head when Sophia spoke, as though she was measuring something. The fact that the flowers he sent were always the same kind, white freesias, the same flower that used to sit in a small glass vase on the desk of the operations manager of her former company. But Sophia had not paused. Sophia had never been good at pausing. 3 years earlier, the name Nathan Carter had meant almost nothing to the people who attended Sophia's dinner parties. He was introduced, when introduced at all, as her husband, the operations manager, the quiet one, the man who sat at the end of the table and refilled glasses when they ran low and laughed at the right moments and never demanded to be the center of anything. Sophia's mother called him dependable, and she meant it as an insult. Her father had a different word, forgettable. Her friends never called him anything at all. They spoke to Sophia. They complimented Sophia's taste, her vision, her instincts. They asked Sophia how she had built such a remarkable company so young, and Sophia would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and say something modest that was not actually modest, and Nathan would be sitting 3 feet away, saying nothing, because he understood by then that saying something would only make things worse. The company was called Heart Integrated Solutions. It carried Sophia's name because it had been started with her family's seed capital. That was a fact everyone knew. What almost nobody knew, what nobody had bothered to find out, was that the seed capital had purchased a logo and a registered address and a brochure. Everything else had been Nathan. The first client had come through a connection Nathan had cultivated for 2 years before the company existed. The operational framework that made the company scalable had been designed by Nathan on a series of legal pads during 6 consecutive weekends, while Sophia attended a wellness retreat. The first expansion into a second regional market had happened because Nathan had spent 4 months flying economy to meetings that Sophia had declined to attend, calling them beneath her level. She was the CEO. She had the title. She had the Instagram presence and the speaking invitation at a regional business forum, and a profile in a local magazine that called her a visionary. Nathan had the spreadsheets, the client relationships, the vendor contracts, the institutional knowledge that lived nowhere except inside his head, because he had never thought protected, because he had believed for a long time that the marriage was a protection. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about a great many things. The moment everything began to fracture was not dramatic. That is the thing about real collapses. They do not arrive with sirens. They arrive with a single line in a quarterly report that does not match the projection, and then another line the following quarter. And a phone call from a client who phrases their concern very carefully because they are not yet ready to leave, but they are thinking about it. Nathan had seen it before Sophia had. He had seen it building for nearly 8 months, had flagged it in 3 separate internal reports, had requested a meeting with the board twice, and been told Sophia would address it in the next cycle. Sophia had not addressed it. Sophia had been in Mykonos. When Nathan finally got her alone in the same room and laid the numbers out across the conference table, printed, highlighted, annotated, she had looked at them for approximately 40 seconds before she looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Doing what?" "This." She gestured at the papers. "This whole panic performance. This is what you do, Nathan. You catastrophize. You make everything into a crisis because it makes you feel important." He had stared at her. "The Meridian account is leaving," he said. "I have the email. Meridian has been threatening to leave for 2 years. This time they signed with competitor. 3 days ago. I have the confirmation." She had stood up, smoothed her jacket, and told him to find a solution. That was what operations managers were for. He had found a solution. He had found 3. He had presented them to the board 6 days later, and 2 had been approved, and for approximately 4 months it had looked like the company might stabilize after all. And then Sophia had approved a marketing campaign that cost $400,000 and generated 11 leads, none of which converted. And then she had authorized a rebrand that nobody on the client-facing team had been consulted on. And then she had taken the company card to a resort in the Maldives for what she filed as a client entertainment expense. And the client she named had not actually been present. Nathan had found out about the last one from the accounting team. He had gone to her that evening, and he had been calm because he was always calm, and he had said they needed to talk seriously about the company's financial position, and she had looked at him with an expression he had learned to recognize, the expression that meant she had already decided he was a problem, and she had said, quietly and precisely, "My parents were right about you. You have never believed in this company. You have never believed in me. And I am finished pretending that this marriage is something it isn't." The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Nathan did not contest them. He did not call a lawyer to negotiate terms. He did not sit across a mediation table and fight for assets or percentages or the kind of settlement that would have taken months and cost both of them more than the company was currently worth. He signed where he was told to sign, returned the documents through a courier, and was gone from the house by the following Friday. Sophia's mother had opened a bottle of champagne. Her father had shaken his head slowly, not out of sympathy for Nathan, but out of particular disappointment of a man who felt the whole situation had taken too long. "Should have been done 2 years ago," he said, and that was the last time Nathan Carter's name was spoken in that house for quite some time. The employees found out on a Monday morning when Nathan's access card stopped working. There was no announcement, no farewell meeting, no email from leadership thanking him for his contributions. His desk had been cleared over the weekend. His name had been removed from the internal directory. The only evidence that he had ever occupied that office was a small indentation on the carpet where his chair had sat for 6 years. The receptionist, a woman named Amara, had been the one to notice the indentation. She had stood in the doorway of the empty office for a long moment, then gone back to her desk and said nothing to anyone, because she understood, as most people in that building understood, that saying something would accomplish nothing. Amara was not the only one who noticed his absence in ways that mattered. Within 3 weeks of Nathan leaving, the Callaway account requested an urgent review meeting. The Callaway account was the company's second largest. It had been managed almost entirely through Nathan's personal relationship with their operations director, a methodical man named Douglas, who had once told Nathan directly that he trusted him more than he trusted his own internal team. Douglas had agreed to the meeting, sat through 40 minutes of reassurances from Sophia and a newly promoted account manager, and left without signing the renewal. He signed the cancellation notice 11 days later. Then the Brandt Group began asking questions. Then Pembroke Industries missed 2 response deadlines from the company's side and stopped answering calls. Then the accounting team flagged a cash flow problem that had been quietly building for 4 months. The same problem Nathan had identified, the same one his solutions had temporarily patched, the same one that had resumed growing the moment those solutions stopped being actively managed. Sophia held a board meeting. She presented a recovery plan. The board asked questions she could not answer. She told them she was assembling a new operations team. The board gave her 90 days. She did not tell them she had no idea where to begin. The news about Carter acquisitions reached her through her father, which was ironic, given everything that would follow. He had called her on a Thursday evening, his voice carrying particular energy of a man who had received information he considered valuable. A firm had been making quiet inquiries about heart-integrated solutions, not a hostile approach, more like a prolonged, careful observation, the kind of attention that preceded a serious offer. "Who are they?" Sophia asked. "Carter Acquisitions. Private. Nobody knows much about the principal. But the money is real. Very real." She had written the name down on a notepad beside her phone. Carter Acquisitions. She had stared at it for a moment, then moved on, because she had 11 other problems requiring attention, and a Carter she didn't know felt less urgent than a Callaway she had already lost. 3 weeks later, Carter Acquisitions made a formal offer. The number was serious enough that the board didn't laugh. It was also structured in a way that suggested whoever had designed it understood exactly what the company was worth in its damaged state, exactly where its recoverable value sat, and exactly how much leverage the buyer held. It was not a generous offer. It was a precise one. The kind of offer that told you the person on the other side had done their homework so thoroughly that negotiating felt almost embarrassing. Sophia had tried to negotiate anyway. Grace, the representative, had listened politely, communicated a response within 24 hours, and the number had moved by exactly enough to make Sophia feel heard, without actually conceding anything meaningful. The deal closed in 6 weeks. Carter Acquisitions held controlling interest. Sophia retained her CEO title, her salary, and her office. The board was restructured. 2 members were replaced by Carter appointees. The operational framework was quietly rebuilt by a team that arrived, worked efficiently, and communicated exclusively through Grace. The company stabilized inside 4 months. Sophia told people it was her leadership, her resilience, her refusal to let the company die. She said it at a business luncheon in February. She said it again in an interview with a regional financial publication. She had almost convinced herself it was true. Then the flowers arrived. White freesias. No card with a name. Just a note, handwritten, that said, "You have rebuilt well. I would like to know you." Her mother had called it fate. Her friends had called it the universe correcting itself. Sophia had called Grace and asked, with great effort to appear calm, what exactly was happening. Grace had smiled. Sophia could hear the smile through the phone and said simply that her employer had an interest that went beyond business and that he hoped she would be open to exploring it and that he understood if she needed time to consider. Sophia had not needed time. The first dinner was arranged for the following Thursday. She spent 2 days deciding what to wear. The dinners happened in private rooms. Always a restaurant she had never been to before. Always a table in a space that had been reserved exclusively for the evening. Always candlelight and food that arrived without her ordering, because someone had already decided what she would enjoy. It was the kind of orchestration that communicated wealth more effectively than any number could. Sophia understood that language. She had spent her whole life trying to speak it, but the groom's chair was always empty. That was a detail that her friends found unbearable and that Sophia had trained herself to frame as intrigue. Grace sat across from her at each dinner, representing her employer with the composed efficiency of someone who had been doing this specific job for a long time. She asked questions about Sophia's life, her ambitions, her vision for the company's future. She listened without interrupting. She took no notes, at least none that were visible, and yet she seemed to retain everything perfectly. Sophia asked, at the third dinner, whether she could at least see a photograph. Grace had considered this for a moment, then said her employer valued privacy above almost everything else, and that he believed the right foundation for any relationship was built on character and conversation rather than appearance and assumption. She said it gently, as though it were a philosophy rather than a refusal. Sophia had gone home that night and told her mother the whole thing, and her mother had gripped her hands and said, "Sophia, a man that careful with his privacy is a man with something serious to protect. That means serious money. Do not ruin this." Sophia had not ruined it. She had shown up to every dinner. She had been charming and considered and had shared enough of herself to seem open without seeming desperate. She had talked about the company's recovery, about her vision for expansion, about the kind of partnership she believed could exist between 2 people who both understood mechanics of building something from nothing. She believed by the 6th dinner that she was falling for a man she had never seen. She did not examine that belief too carefully. The proposal arrived not in person but through Grace, which should have been the detail that gave her pause. A formal letter, beautifully typeset, explaining that her employer wished to make his intentions clear and that he hoped she would consider a future built on mutual respect and aligned ambition. Attached was a prenuptial summary, not the full document. Just a summary that outlined terms both protective and generous, drafted with precision that suggested a legal team of considerable size. Her father had read the summary 3 times and said nothing, which many approved. Her mother had already begun calling venues. Sophia had said yes through Grace, and Grace had said she would convey the acceptance. And within 48 hours of planning had begun with a kind of momentum that felt less like a wedding and more like a corporate merger being executed on a tight timeline. 11 weeks. That was all it took. And in those 11 weeks, Sophia had not once met the man she was agreeing to marry. She had told herself this was acceptable. She had told herself this was a story she would tell one day at dinner parties. The mysterious billionaire, the proxy courtship, the cathedral wedding, the grand reveal. It was cinematic. It was extraordinary. It was exactly the kind of life she had always believed was owed to her. What she had not told herself, because she was very practiced at not examining things too directly, was that the arrangement also required almost nothing of her. No real vulnerability. No actual exposure. She was agreeing to marry a financial abstraction, and some part of her found that easier than marrying a person. A person could disappoint you in ways that money could not. A person could turn out to be something other than what you had projected onto them. The morning of the wedding, Amara had shown up to the cathedral. This was unexpected. Amara had not been on the initial guest list. She had been added 3 weeks before the wedding, through the Carter acquisition side of the planning, listed simply as a guest of the groom. Sophia had seen the name on the revised list and felt a brief flicker of something she could not immediately name. Then she had moved on to the seating chart and forgotten about it. Amara arrived in a dress the color of dark copper that fit her perfectly. She sat in the third row on the groom's side. She did not look at Sophia when Sophia entered the preparation anteroom and passed briefly through the corridor. She looked straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carrying a particular quality. Not smugness, not anticipation. Something quieter than both of those things. The expression of a person who already knows how a story ends and has made her peace with it. Sophia had noticed her for exactly 2 seconds before her mother had touched her arm and redirected her attention to the photographer. The cathedral filled steadily. The investors arrived in dark suits. The board members arrived and found their seats. The journalists, restricted to the rear section, arranged themselves with cameras and notebooks. 214 people settled into the carved wooden pews and waited. The organ began. Sophia's father took her arm. She felt, in that moment, what she would later be unable to describe accurately to anyone, a feeling that sat precisely between triumph and terror, as though some part of her that she had long since stopped listening to was trying to send a message she was not equipped to receive. She began to walk. The cathedral was a kind of building that made you feel small in a way that was supposed to feel holy. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow above the chandeliers. Stone columns lined the nave like sentinels. Light came through stained glass and long-colored shafts that fell across the pews and the guests and the white floor arrangements that had cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Everything was exactly as planned. Everything was exactly as Grace had confirmed it would be, down to the temperature of the room and the precise arrangement of the altar flowers. Sophia walked and felt the eyes of 214 people settle on her. She was good at this, being looked at. She had spent her whole life understanding that being seen was its own form of power, and she carried herself accordingly. Spine straight, chin level, the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who understood that this moment belonged to her. Her father released her arm at the altar. He kissed her cheek and stepped back and took his place beside her mother in the front pew. Her mother was already pressing a folded handkerchief to the corner of her eye, performing a grief she did not feel because the occasion seemed to require it. Sophia faced the altar and waited. The organ faded. A stillness settled over the cathedral that was different from the stillness before. Heavier, more deliberate, the kind of quiet that a crowd produces when it collectively holds its breath. Then the side doors opened. The groom's entrance was from the left, through a smaller door that led to a private anteroom. The guests on that side turned first. Then the turning spread, row by row, like a slow wave moving to the pews toward the front. Sophia did not turn immediately. She had been told, by her mother, that a bride did not turn to watch the groom enter. The groom came to her. So she stood at the altar and she waited and she listened to the sound of footsteps on stone, measured and unhurried, and she felt the presence of someone arriving beside her with particular calm of a person who is exactly where they intended to be. She turned. For exactly 3 seconds, her mind did not process what her eyes were seeing. The brain does that sometimes. When incoming information conflicts too violently with everything it has been told to expect, it stalls. It runs the data again. It searches for an alternative interpretation. It insists, briefly, that there must be a mistake. Nathan Carter stood at the altar. He was wearing a black tuxedo that fit him in a way that nothing had ever fit him in the years she had known him. His posture was different. Not the posture of a man managing invisibility. The posture of a man who had stopped needing to. He looked at her with an expression that was completely composed, not cold, not warm, simply settled. The expression of a person who had planned something for a very long time and had arrived at the moment of its execution without surprise. Sophia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Behind her, she heard her mother make a sound that was not grief and not joy, a compressed, confused sound, like a woman whose brain had also stalled. Her father said nothing. He had gone very still in the way that large men go still when they're trying to process something that has destabilized them completely. In the third row, Amara sat with her hands still folded, her expression unchanged. Nathan looked at Sophia for a long moment. Then he turned slightly and extended his hand toward the side door he had entered through. Amara stood. She walked forward and took the place beside Nathan with the unhurried ease of someone taking a seat they had always been meant to occupy. She was not in a wedding dress. She was in her copper dress, and she stood straight, and she looked at no one in particular, and she did not smile in the way of someone who had won something. She simply stood there, present, as though presence itself was the only statement she needed to make. A murmur moved through the cathedral. Sophia felt it before she heard it. The shift in the room, the collective recalibration of 214 people who had arrived expecting one story and were now understanding that they were inside a different one entirely. Nathan, her voice came out smaller than she intended. What is this? It was not a question. It was the only arrangement of words she could produce. Nathan reached into the interior pocket of his tuxedo and produced a small remote. He pressed a single button. The large screen behind the altar, installed the previous day, approved by Grace, listed on the event plan as a display for a slideshow of the couple's courtship, came to life. It did not display a courtship slideshow. It displayed a spreadsheet, then a second one, then a series of financial documents, transaction records, company accounts, expense reports, a column of dates running down the left side of one document that corresponded precisely to the dates of 3 international trips filed as client entertainment expenses. Beside each date, a location. Beside each location, a charge amount. Beside each charge amount, a single column header in clean black text. Personal expenditure, no client present. The documents were internally sourced. Anyone who had worked at Hart Integrated Solutions would recognize the formatting immediately. Several people in the cathedral had worked there. Several more were current board members who had approved budgets without ever seeing the line items now displayed across 12 feet of high-resolution screen. The murmur in the cathedral became something louder. Sophia turned back to Nathan. "You need to stop this," she said. Her voice had found its edge again. "Right now, you need to stop this immediately." Nathan said nothing. The screen changed. The next document was a board report, not a standard board report. A reconstructed one, assembled from internal communications, email chains, meeting minutes, and operational logs spanning 6 years. It had been organized with the kind of methodical precision that only someone who had lived inside the company's machinery could produce. Every major client relationship mapped to its origin point. Every successful expansion traced to its architect. Every profitable quarter annotated with the name of the person who had actually built the systems that generated it. Nathan Carter appeared on nearly every page. Sophia Hart appeared in the title column and almost nowhere else. The board members in the cathedral were reading it the way people read things that cost them money. Fast, then slow, then fast again as they returned to specific lines to confirm they had understood correctly. Two of them had produced phones and were photographing the screen. A third had leaned across to a colleague and was speaking in a low, urgent voice that carried none of the discretion he probably intended. Sophia watched the screen and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt afraid, not the performative anxiety of a woman navigating a difficult board meeting, not the managed discomfort of someone absorbing bad news she had already half anticipated. This was the fear of a person who has built an entire architecture of self-belief on a foundation they never examined, and is now watching someone remove the foundation stone by stone in front of everyone they have ever needed to impress. Nathan, her voice was lower now. Whatever you think you are doing, this is not the way. I know, he said. His voice was calm in the way of a river that runs deep. I used to say that to you, about the company finances, about the Meridian account, about the Callaway situation. You told me I was catastrophizing. She had no answer for that. The screen changed again. This document was different from the others. It was not a financial record or an operational log. It was a personal expense summary, and it was specific in a way that made several guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Every company card transaction that Sophia had filed under business expenses over a 4-year period, cross-referenced against client records, travel manifests, and meeting logs. The ones that matched legitimate business activity were marked in gray. The ones with no corresponding business record, the resort in the Maldives, the shopping trips in Paris, the spa weekends filed as team development retreats, were marked in red. There were a great many red entries. The number at the bottom of the column had 6 figures. Sophia's father stood up. He was a large man, and he stood with the authority of someone accustomed to his physical presence producing results. And he said, loudly enough for the nearest 4 rows to hear, "This is enough. This is a private family matter, and this ends now." Nathan looked at him with an expression that was entirely without hostility and entirely without deference, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing her father had ever encountered from someone he had spent years dismissing. "You call me forgettable," Nathan said. "At the Christmas dinner in 2019, I was standing behind you, and you didn't know I was there. You told Sophia's uncle that she had unfortunately married the most forgettable man you had ever met." Her father said nothing. "Sit down," Nathan said, quietly, not as a request. Her father sat down. The room was silent in a way that rooms become silent when something has shifted so completely that the normal social rules feel suddenly inapplicable. Nobody knew what they were permitted to do. Nobody wanted to be the person who moved too soon or spoke too early and marked themselves as having chosen the wrong side before the full picture was clear. Sophia turned to Amara. It was an instinct more than a decision. The instinct of a person searching for a familiar target when everything else has become unrecognizable. Sophia had spent years treating Amara as furniture. Capable furniture, reliable furniture, but furniture nonetheless. Someone who existed in the background of the office to manage the things that Sophia found beneath her attention. "You," Sophia said. The word came out with more weight than she intended. "How long have you known about this?" Amara met her eyes steadily. "Since he left," Amara said. "He called me 3 days after he signed the divorce papers. He had a business proposition. I had a choice to make." She paused. It wasn't a difficult choice. "A business proposition," Sophia repeated. The phrase sat wrong in the moment, and she knew it, and she could not stop herself. "So this is what you are to him, a business proposition." Amara's expression did not change. "He offered me the CEO position of the restructured company," she said. "I accepted. We have been working together for 2 years. What I am to him beyond that is not your business, and it never will be." The screen behind the altar went dark for exactly 4 seconds. Then it displayed one final document, It was a legal notice. Formal letterhead. Carter Acquisitions at the top. Below, in clean, precise language, a declaration that effective immediately, the board of Hart Integrated Solutions was being reconstituted under the authority of the controlling shareholder. 3 named board members were removed. 2 named executives were terminated. 1 named individual, Sophia Hart, was relieved of the CEO title, effective the date printed at the bottom of the document. Today's date. Below the legal text, a single line that was not legal language. It was personal. Nathan had written it himself, and Grace had included it at his instruction, and it had been there in the document for 6 weeks waiting for this moment. There was never a wedding. There was only an acquisition. The cathedral emptied slowly. Not all at once, the way crowds disperse after something ordinary ends. Slowly, in the particular way of people who have witnessed something they will spend years describing to others and want to make sure they have absorbed every detail correctly. They filed out in low conversations, glancing back, reassembling what they had just seen against what they had arrived expecting to see. The journalists left last. Their restricted section had given them the worst seats in the building and the best story of the year. Sophia stood at the altar for a long time after most of the guests had gone. Her mother had tried, twice, to take her arm and guide her toward the exit. Both times Sophia had not moved, not because she was making a statement, but because her legs had arrived at a decision independent of her will, and the decision was stillness. Her father had left without speaking to anyone. He had walked down the center aisle with his eyes forward and his jaw set and pushed through the cathedral doors into morning light. And that was the last anyone saw of him that day. Her friends had gone too. Quickly. The kind of quick that told you they were already composing the messages they would send each other before they reached their cars. Eventually, it was only Sophia and Nathan and Amar and Grace, standing in the vast quiet of the cathedral that still smelled of flowers ordered for a wedding that had never been intended to happen. Nathan walked to the front pew and sat down, not on the groom's side, not on the bride's side, simply the nearest seat, as though the choreography of the morning was finished, and what remained was something that required less architecture. Sophia finally moved. She sat 2 rows behind him, still in her dress, the veil pushed back from her face. She looked at the back of his head for a moment, at the familiar shape of it, and felt something move through her that she did not immediately have a name for. It was not guilt, exactly. It was a thing that comes before guilt, when you're still too close to the event to have processed it into something you can label and manage. Did you plan all of this in the beginning? She asked. From the day you left. Nathan was quiet for a moment. I planned the acquisition from the beginning, he said. The company was recoverable. I knew that because I knew exactly what had gone wrong and exactly how to fix it. That part was straightforward. And the rest of it, he turned to look at her. The rest of it took longer to decide. There was a version where I just bought the company and rebuilt it and never came back. I considered that version for about a year. What changed? The interview, he said, the one you gave in February, where you talked about your resilience, your leadership, your refusal to let the company die. He said it without anger, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. I had been paying the salaries of every person in that building for 4 months by then, through a structure you never examined closely enough to understand. And you sat in that interview and you talked about your resilience. Sophia said nothing. I'm not doing this for revenge, Nathan said. I need you to understand that, because I think you're going to tell people it was revenge, and I want to be accurate. The company needed a public correction. The board needed to understand what they had actually been approving for 6 years. The record needed to exist somewhere outside my own memory. And humiliating me in front of 200 people. I invited 200 people to a business acquisition, he said. The humiliation was the distance between who you told them you were and who the documents showed you to be. I didn't create that distance. She looked at him for a long time. What happens to me now? She said. You retain your personal shares. The value is reduced but not eliminated. You have the settlement from the divorce, which is generous because I did not fight it. You have your family's money, which has always been there regardless. He paused. You are not destroyed, Sophia. You are just accurately measured for the first time. She absorbed that. Amara and Grace had moved to the back of the cathedral, speaking quietly, giving the space that the moment seemed to require. Amara held a folder of documents, already moving forward, already organized around what came next. She had the quality of someone for whom today was not the culmination of something, but the beginning of something, and the distinction mattered. Sophia watched her and understood, perhaps for the first time, what it looked like when competence and loyalty occupied the same person. She had had that. She had had Nathan, who was both of those things, and she had looked directly at it for 6 years and seen only a man who was not impressive enough for the life she believed she deserved. She stood. She reached up and unclipped the veil from her hair. She folded it once precisely and laid it across the pew beside her with a care that surprised even herself. As though some part of her understood that the gesture needed to be clean, she walked down the center aisle without looking back. Outside, the morning light was sharp and even and indifferent in the way that light is always indifferent to what happens beneath it. The cameras had gone. The cars had mostly cleared. The floral arrangements on the cathedral steps would be collected later and donated, because Nathan had arranged that too. Sophia stood on the steps for a moment, alone, and looked at the empty driveway. Then she walked, not toward her mother's waiting car, not toward anyone who had been inside that building, just forward, into the ordinary morning, carrying particular weight of a person who has finally been handed an accurate mirror and cannot decide yet whether the reflection is the end of something or the beginning. Inside the cathedral, Nathan and Amara walked out together through the side door, into a quieter street, into a waiting car, into a future that had been 2 years in the careful making. The company would open on Monday under new leadership. The employees would be told the full story. For the first time in 6 years, the person running the building would be the same person who actually knew how to run it.